The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. Today we'll be talking about the best ways to integrate OmniCenter into your ITSM framework, or how to expand your service desk framework leveraging OmniCenter. We're going to spend a few minutes going through these concepts on a high level, and then we're going to jump into practical examples of ways to use these capabilities in the real world. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So OmniCenter is going to play a key role in a successful ITSM implementation. And while many of the things that OmniCenter could do to help are obvious, some are less so. If we look at the functional areas of the ITIL model, it divides the areas of management into 5 main functions: fault, capacity, accounting, performance, and security. This portion of the model is sometimes called by its acronym FCAPS. Now, OmniCenter is going to have an impact on all of these areas to some extent, but it's going to have the deepest impacts in the fault, capacity, and performance areas of this model. So let's take a more in-depth look to see exactly how we can focus the power of a centralized management system like OmniCenter to have the most impact. So the ITIL model defines service level management as the processes that are involved in ensuring that required IT services are delivered when and where they are supposed to be. So this is also going to necessarily include working closely with availability management, capacity management, incident management, and problem management teams to ensure that the required levels of quality and service are achieved, and as always, within the resources allocated by the financial management. But this drives the needs for the service level manager to get very deep into reporting. And OmniCenter is designed to make this simple by having easy self-service reporting tools and the ability to easily standardize and automate the sending of reports with just a few clicks. So that's going to reduce the burden on the other teams to create the reports for them. The capacity management team includes several related areas, not only bandwidth and network capacity, but also things like workload management, performance management, and that can include things like user experiencing monitoring and response times. So this team is also responsible for kind of strategic resource management, which can include things like tools, staffing, and even training for technical teams. Now, OmniCenter could provide a wealth of information to the capacity management team. The obvious data is bandwidth, trending, things like server and cluster resources. But OmniCenter's got a lot more to offer the capacity folks. Things like monitoring application response times, sudden changes in traffic usage, even measurements of staff and process effectiveness, such like time is to resolve or acknowledge incidents, can be worked into the capacity management reports to give them deeper insights. Now, the service transition function in ITIL is responsible for deploying those applications and migrating them into the production environment. So as a result, they're also going to have to own the change management process to make sure that the production environment stays stable. And this is going to integrate with tools in OmniCenter like configuration management, change detection, change logging using our logging SSH gateway that's built into OmniCenter, so you can centralize all of the change management functions and all of the infrastructure configuration functions through that central management platform. So you've got a single point of audit, you've got a single point of accountability, and you can see exactly what users made what changes and when that happened, and see everything that they typed in on the command line using that integrated SSH gateway. Of course, the area that OmniCenter is going to have the biggest impact on is operations. So ITIL breaks this into several related processes. The first and most important process that we're going to impact is event management. And event management includes fault detection, which is monitoring the production services and resources, or even testing applications the same way that users would access them, so that you can detect changes that might be impacting users, but not obviously impacting metrics on servers or not impacting traffic yet. But it also includes things like notification. So that's not just necessarily sending out texts and email. It can also include things like opening up service tickets or even trying to remediate problems with active response, such as restarting services or rebooting servers to try and restore service more quickly. So we're going to go into that in a little bit more depth later as well. Some of the other processes that are a part of operations that OmniCenter is going to have an impact on are problem management, which they define as finding the root cause of problems for faster resolution. So OmniCenter can do this in several ways, including correlating related outages automatically using things like parenting, or you can create analysis and correlation rules. It's also going to have an impact on incident management. And they define that as a focus on forensic aspects, so making sure an incident doesn't happen again. OmniCenter provides deep forensic data, and the wealth of recorded historical data that we're already collecting across all the devices in the environment can help find likely incident precursors, which can then be instrumented and alarmed on. We'll show some live examples of that here in a few minutes. Now, there's a number of different integration points that we can use in OmniCenter to tie it into an existing ITSM system and make it a seamless part of the ecosystem. So event detection is probably the most obvious, and that can be integrated into the servicing or ticketing system in a number of different ways. So most of the larger customers that we deal with are using ticket management systems like ServiceNow, Remedy, or similar task-oriented systems. Most of those have APIs that will allow us to create incidents directly. With ServiceNow in particular, we actually leverage that API for two-way communication, so we can link the ServiceNow incident to the OmniCenter incident together directly in the web interface. So OmniCenter can set the priority or the severity of the incident in the ServiceNow ticket. We'll get the ServiceNow ticket number back into OmniCenter, which we can include as a link on the incident page, so you can go directly from there into your ServiceNow portal, and the two can be tightly coupled together. It can also then automatically be set to close incidents when an incident in OmniCenter is resolved, the service comes back up, it can send that message to ServiceNow, and you can either have that automatically close the incident or at least add that information into the data for the ticket so that the operator running the ticket knows that the problem's been resolved and can do whatever follow-up is required before closing the ticket. With some of the smaller systems, though, they don't necessarily have a really well-developed API, so you can still do this via email integration, and we kind of use this as a fallback because almost all ticketing systems have some way where you can convert emails into tickets and get those into your workflow, your actual flow. So OmniCenter tries to make this easier by letting you custom format the email messages so that you can actually create a rule, create a custom formatted message, and have that rule send the custom formatted message whenever that particular type of failure occurs. So for example, if I know I want to open a ticket for everything in my server team, I can craft an email format that's going to have all of the right information in it, but it's going to be in a format that is easy for my ticketing system to parse. And then I can have human readable messages go out in a different format. But the incident management rules gives you the flexibility to be able to do that and to send those custom messages out whenever and wherever needed for any or all incidents. So it's kind of a fallback method, but it's still pretty robust in terms of the capabilities that you've got there for integration. You can also use OmniCenter's active response features. So this will allow you to automatically execute PowerShell or SSH commands on devices directly. There are some ticketing systems that will allow you to open tickets that way. This may be a method that you would use to do that, although it's probably not the first one I would try. But more importantly, this allows you to do things like try to restart the services, reboot the servers, restart a port, or even dump diagnostic data that's going to be useful. So the second the incident occurs, if I can go onto that system and dump the running process list to a file, I know that when I'm going to troubleshoot this, I can go in and see exactly what was going on in that system as a snapshot the moment we saw that thing go down. So if I'm trying to hunt down a problem that's intermittent or maybe only occurs briefly, rather than trying to catch it in real time, I can have OmniCenter go out, run the commands that I need on that system so that I can go back in after the fact when I get that notification that the problem occurred and kind of get a snapshot of what was going on at the time. Now, there's a couple of other integration points that help OmniCenter work with the entire ITSM system and not just the incidents or the events management part of the system. So you can actually use change management integration to do things like when you provision a new system in your environment or in your CMDB, have it automatically update OmniCenter to add those new devices in through the API. So I can create new devices as they're added to my main inventory or delete them as they're removed, keeping it in sync with my CMDB or my inventory system to the highest extent possible. And using OmniCenter's built-in configuration rules, I can then have those systems applied to the correct categories, the correct strategic groups. I can have all of the right templates applied to them. And through those templates, I can drive all of the different settings that I want for thresholds, for individual service checks that are going to be run on them, for which kind of log messages I want to record. All of that detail can be built into those templates and passed on to those devices automatically when the API is inserting them into the system. You can also use APIs to create or close maintenance windows. So if I've got a change management system where I'm putting in change requests, and when they're approved, I can have that system make a call to OmniCenter, create the appropriate maintenance windows to match that change request, so I can make sure that I'm not going to be getting false alarms for something that was a known outage, and to make sure that when I run those end of month uptime reports, they're going to report the correct data. All my unscheduled outages will be automatically subtracted from that uptime data, so I can show 100% uptime for systems that only had scheduled outages, and I can do that seamlessly using the change management tool. All of these APIs are designed specifically to use basically webhook technology. So it's designed to be a simple web call. So you can integrate them to almost anything, and you can configure authentication on them. You can use them across secure protocols like SSL, so you can make sure that they can't be eavesdropped on. But the whole idea is to try to make it a lot simpler so that there's not separate points of administration. I don't really want to have to deal with, going into multiple systems to create a change window. I don't want to have to create a maintenance window in OmniCenter, then create it in my change approval process, and go through all those multiple steps. It's much, much simpler and smoother if I can just do that in kind of one fell swoop. So now also let's look at some of the best practices that we recommend for your service desk implementation to really kind of get industry best practices into your workflows to make that go as smoothly as possible. So one of the first things that we generally recommend is not to let teams use silo products if there's any alternative. So it's okay to let a team use in-depth diagnostic tools to work on their specific area of expertise if required, but for generalized monitoring, you should avoid this as it adds additional training burden and it can lead to a lot of finger pointing. Such as, well, our tool shows it's up and your tool shows it's not responding. So obviously your tool's wrong. If everybody shares a common view of reality, it really helps eliminate that from the troubleshooting and the recovery process. Also, this one should be obvious, but you'd be surprised how often we see this. Relying on someone to manually check application functionality is bound to fail sooner or later and creates the potential for extended outages. So we need to make sure that all of our application checks are automated as much as possible, and that those alerts or notifications are going out to the appropriate places or opening the appropriate tickets as much as possible. You should also make sure that support teams are not doing their only monitoring. So if a team is doing their own monitoring for their area exclusively, you're basically creating an information silo, and that's really not okay. It's okay if they want a view of what the command center is seeing, but it's not okay to let them perform that monitoring instead of the command center. So departments and teams that perform their own monitoring with no oversight tend to hide their dirty laundry. They tend to use temporary fixes, and as a result, you're going to have more outages, longer outage times, and a higher percentage of recurring outages. And because there's no oversight, senior management is usually unaware of the number and scope of the outages. So then when you start having issues and customers start taking their business elsewhere, senior management doesn't know why. There's no visibility to it. So when the main service desk is doing all the monitoring centrally, there's two main purposes for that. The first one is to make sure that they can determine whether the problem in one area is affecting other areas, so spotting global problems. If a communications line goes down and several applications go red at the same time, the command center folks will know which support teams to notify, so you don't have the application teams trying to troubleshoot why their application is down when the problem is in the networking team, but they have no visibility to that. So that's a potential huge waste of your resources and time. The second purpose is transparency, because teams that are being watched by others tend to be run better with fewer problems, because when something breaks, they want to find a permanent solution so the same issue doesn't happen again, and everybody kind of keeps each other honest. Also, one of the key points is not to ignore alerts. We see this a lot especially in smaller organizations, and it's a sure way of getting into trouble. At some point, a mistake is going to be made and someone's going to ignore the wrong alert. So the best way to deal with this is to avoid the problem by making sure that non-actionable alerts are not even seen. If there's things going on in the environment that you're not going to react to, high CPU for a short period of time on a server, for example, might not be something that the server team really needs to get out of bed in the middle of the night for. So you can still report after the fact by running reports. So I can have a scheduled report that goes out every day that shows the server team, here's what the server's CPUs were doing yesterday. But until it gets to the point where they're going to take immediate action, I don't want to flood their mailbox with notifications. Because then if they just start ignoring them, bad things start happening. Same related point, don't let the system get flooded with alerts, because a monitoring screen that's flooded with alerts makes it really easy to miss a critical alert. So if there's red all over my, my strategic overview, or my knock screen has all kinds of red on it, I'm not going to notice when something goes down that's really important. So we need to make sure that alerts get acted upon and acknowledged or corrected as soon as possible. If you let them sit in the queue until the regular work hours come around, because it's an off hours problem that's not really relevant, it's not a good way to handle that problem. So if the condition is acceptable during off hours, the alert itself should only be generated when it's not acceptable and when someone is available to work on the problem. And when alerts don't get addressed within a specific time frame, you should use escalation tools to make sure that additional folks get notified and that those problems get escalated. Also, be careful of monitoring tunnel vision. If you want to monitor from where the users are, you can use our network of remote reflector systems that Netreo provides for application testing that allow you to run those tests from various points around the internet or around the world. You can also use private reflectors, so you can set up your own remote polling engines to be able to do this kind of remote monitoring from different points in your environment, behind a firewall, within a virtual data center, or even on the other side of the world, so that you can be monitoring application response time from where the users are accessing the applications from, so that you're not running into the problem where everything looks fine from the data center, but half the users in Europe just got dropped because of a BGP fluctuation. So being able to get visibility to that is important. And OmniCenter provides some very easy to use tools to be able to do that. So you should definitely try to take advantage of them. Now we're going to go ahead and transition into the live demonstration part of this presentation. And I'm going to go through some real world examples of the things that we've just talked about and ways to better integrate into your environment. So the first thing that I want to talk about is event detection. So we talked about how getting an alert can drive an active response into those actions. And I'm going to walk you through the process of creating those active response alerts and kind of show you how they work so that you can see exactly how that's going to have the biggest impact on your production environment. So the first thing I need to do is go to administration, and then I'm going to go down to alerts, and I'm going to go to actions. This is where we would configure all the different kinds of notifications that OmniCenter can create. So that might include email, that's going to include SMS messages, other kinds of mobile notifications, things like that. But it also allows me to go in and create what we call active response actions. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a group name, and I'm going to call this one Restart Service. And I'm going to set a manual alert level. Now, what the manual alert level allows me to do is to say that I want users to be able to execute this action from the web interface. I can optionally use it to automatically execute this action if I want to, or I can have it manual only. And if I set it to be manual, only users with the appropriate access level or higher will have the ability to execute that action. So if I want only my administrators to be able to restart services, I can set that as part of that action group. If I leave this set to none, the action can only be called automatically by OmniCenter. So I have to configure it as the response to an alert or an incident management rule, and I won't be able to execute it manually through the web interface. So if I set this up here with a manual access level and hit add group, it's then going to allow me to create an action name. I'm just going to call it restart. And then for action method type, I'm going to select one of the active response methods. So there's multiple methods here that I can use, and you'll see that webhook is available as an active response or as a regular webhook. The main difference is that anything set to active response only runs when the incident first opens. So the whole idea here is if I'm running an incident against a command against SSH to restart a service, for example, I don't want that command to be rerun every time another notification goes out or an acknowledgement happens. I only want it to happen once when the incident first occurs. It'll either recover the alert or it won't, but if it doesn't work, I don't want to keep retrying it over and over again. So once I've selected the method that I want to use, and active response windows is shorthand for PowerShell, I can go in here and put in service restart, for example, or whatever the command is that I want. Give it a macro for service name, and then select which hours I'm allowed to perform this action. So a really good example here is we have one customer that has an action method set to do a server reboot. They have that set to only run during non-working hours. So the whole idea is if the NOC is in the office, they're going to get notified and the NOC can take action on it. If it's after hours and their NOC isn't staffed, they want OmniCenter to try to reboot that system first so that they can see if that recovers the problem before they have to start escalating and getting people out of bed. So you can set the hours that it's allowed to execute here. If I limit the hours that I'm allowed to use this method, that even affects manually executing it. So if I set this, for example, to only allow use during non-working hours, if someone goes in during the workday and pushes that button and says, execute this action, it's not going to attempt to run this command on the system because it's excluded by those hours. So you can use this to kind of control very closely who's allowed and when they're allowed to execute a specific action or when you want that sort of thing to happen. Once I create that action, you'll actually see down here in my list here of all the different things I've created. I've got a service restart group that I've just created, and it's created this group as a regular notification group, and you can see who's allowed to use it and when they're allowed to use it. So here's the restart service group that I just created. It's set to admin level access, and it says that it's not in use, which means it's not set to automatically be called by OmniCenter in any place. Once it's set so that OmniCenter is going to call it, you'll see it actually will say in use here, and clicking on that will show you which services or devices are set to be able to call this particular action. So the way this is configured right now, this is only set as an automated action. I can't use this, or as a manual action. I can't use this as an automated process, or I haven't set it to do that yet. Once it's set as, and once I have the action group that I want to use, all I need to be able to do is to go into any of my different systems that I'm administrating and change their action to include that group. So if I know this is a Windows restart service command, I might want to go into one of my Windows servers here and create a service check that allows me to say, when a particular service goes down, I want you to go ahead and restart that service. So I'm going to go to Edit, I'm going to go to Alerting, and I'm going to pick one of the service checks that I'm already watching here. For example, maybe I'm looking at my DNS server. I want to change that to automatically restart. I can just change the action group to that restart service group, and now it's going to automatically try restarting that service as soon as it calls it. If I also want to notify the NOC, I can do that as well. So I can have multiple different actions selected within that list. You can do as many actions as you want. And when I commit that change, it's going to get written into the device configuration. And as OmniCenter is watching those, if that service goes down, the first thing it's going to do is try to restart that service and notify the NOC. If that succeeds, the incident will immediately recover, and then I'll be able to see that that worked in the logs and in the incident history. If it doesn't work, the incident will stay open, and I'll be able to go in and see that through my incident views. So for example, if I go into active incidents, if I pick any one of these different incidents here that's actually going on right now, I can go in here and say, for this particular incident, I want to be able to manually execute that action. So up here in the corner here, I have this manual action button. And if I click that button, it's going to prompt me for any of the ones that are set to have manual access based on my current permissions. So if I'm logged in as an administrator, I'm going to see the one that I just created there. And I have the option to automatically acknowledge this problem as it executes that command. One thing to note, in an incident, you're going to have primary alarms and you might have related alarms as well. So if there's something that's down because this is down, that's been correlated to this incident, you're going to see multiple systems in here. Active response and manually active response, those commands only execute against the service on the primary alarm. So if the router goes down, for example, and it makes 3 servers unreachable, those servers aren't going to get marked as trying to restart their service. It's just going to say those are unrelated or those are related alarms. I'm not going to manually execute those commands against them because they're not the primary cause. They're not the root cause of that particular problem. So one of the other things that we talked about is creating integration points. So another integration point that I can potentially create is things like a ServiceNow call, for example. So if I want to create a group to open a ServiceNow ticket, I can create that group. And if you go to our documentation in the wiki, there's actually some API documentation here under feature documentation. Clicking on that takes me to a page that shows me the different APIs that are available. And there's actually a integrating webhooks link here that'll show me some examples of commonly used integration services. So if I go down to ServiceNow, it's actually going to show me exactly what kind of data I generally want to provide for ServiceNow in order to execute that action and open the ticket. So I'm going to create a webhook. So if I go in here for webhook, it's going to give me a URL to send to and then a payload where I can put that JSON payload in. So normally the form for these is something like your company name dot servicenow.com. And then there's a URL here /API/now table incident. I'm just going to copy that and put that into my URL. Now for payload, it's expecting to see a JSON payload that contains all of this data about what kind of information I want to send to that system. So if I expand this window a little bit here, you can actually see there's several different variables that I can send to it. And the first ones I'm going to have to send are the username and password that I want to use to access this particular API. And these will be set up on the ServiceNow side. I can also include OmniCenter macros here. So things like host name, host address, alert description, incident ID, all of these can be included in the description of the message. You can also go in and then populate categories. So if I know, this is going to be infrastructure is the category that I'm using, and I want to assign that to my NOC group. I can then go in and customize the contents of this message to set whatever different values I want. Now, if I'm using the priority macro instead of a fixed priority value, this lets OmniCenter insert the priority that you've set for that incident. And I'll show you in just a second where we set that. Once we create this method, it works like any other notification method in the tool. You can even set it to work manually, or you can set it to only be called automatically. And whenever that method gets called, it's going to open that ticket in ServiceNow, and it's going to couple that back to OmniCenter. So when it opens a ticket in ServiceNow, it's going to pull from ServiceNow's API which ticket number got opened, and it's going to create a link in OmniCenter back to that ServiceNow link inside the incident. So when I go to the incident page, there'll be a link on the left-hand side that lets me click through and go directly to that incident in ServiceNow. So I can see the status of those both together and jump back and forth between them really easily. You can also go in here, and when I create the alerting actions, I can set any of these actions to be called by an incident management rule as well. So if I go in here down to incident management, I can set, this is where I would create a manual rule if I want to override. So let's say right now my OmniCenter is set up and it's notifying everybody directly whenever there's a problem, and I want to change that to open only service tickets. I can create a rule that simply says whenever you get a particular message, I'm going to say this is called override with ServiceNow. So I can say, for example, whenever I get a new alarm that is a host, I want to create a new incident and send a custom alert. And I can set exactly what kind of custom alert I want to send, which template I want that to send to. So I'm going to say this is going to be just a standard host alert template, but I'm going to send that to my Open ServiceNow ticket incident that I just created. And it's going to basically insert this rule that says any host alerts are now just going to open ServiceNow tickets. This will derail them from where they were going to be sent. So now instead of getting alerts and having to go through and change all of the different alert contacts in OmniCenter, I've got the ability to go in and just make a rule that will override all the existing settings and start forwarding all of those directly to my ServiceNow implementation. Also on the incident management page is where we have a button to add incident priorities. So if I want to make sure that my ServiceNow tickets are set to the right priority, I can put in a couple of different priorities here, whichever ones work for how your ServiceNow is set up. So if I want to say I have a critical and it's 1, and then I want to create a new one that is, call it warning is 2, and then I create a new one that's informational is 3. I can create as many different priorities as I want, and they'll just be ordered to the number that I place the order value. So if you want to put info first so people don't click on critical by accident, you can easily control that. When I'm looking at an incident now, I'll have the ability to create or control the priority of that incident. So I've now got a button here for priority, and I can set the priority for that incident. And now if this incident opens a trouble ticket in ServiceNow, that priority macro will be populated directly into that message. You could do the same thing with things like email notifications. So if you want to be able to set priorities within an incident, so further notifications or escalations go out with a priority message attached to them, you could easily do that, and it'll include that information in those outbound messages if you use the priority macro to do it. Now, one of the other points that we talked about is integrating configuration management. And so there's a couple of different flavors of configuration management that OmniCenter supports. The most basic one, of course, is going out and pulling the configuration for things like network devices and then just looking for changes. So if I know, for example, that I've got a particular gateway and I want to pull the configuration on it on a regular basis, I can have it going out, logging into those systems, and alerting me when things like the configuration was changed but hasn't been saved. So I can see when changes occur in the system. I can also get notifications from Configuration Manager to show me what the configuration change was. So if I go here under Config Management, under Reports, I can see all the different versions of the configuration here, and I can optionally go in and compare any of the different versions of configuration together to see exactly what changed between the different versions of the configuration. So when I compare these configurations, it's going to give me essentially a highlight reel, show me the entire configuration with the exact lines that changed highlighted in the configuration. When you're looking at this from the configuration management dashboard, you could actually get kind of a summary view of what's going on those particular systems. So if I click on one of these devices and see exactly what changed, here you can see I've got a rule set failure. That means that OmniCenter is set to look for these particular words in that command, in that configuration. And if it's not finding them, it throws an error. The way that you configure that is through templates. So if I go into templates and look at the template that's assigned to those devices here, so let's say I've got a remote routers template, I can actually create configuration management rules. And the configuration management rules tell me, look for a specific thing. So if I go in here and type in, for example, this is going to be my DNS server, I can look for this in any context. So if it's in the global context, I just put blank context. And then I can say this must have or must not have a specific set of data in there. So if it's, DNS server needs to be set to 1111, I can add that into a rule. I can create multiple different rules and then define what action I want to have taken when that happens. So I can have this automatically go in and execute a configuration command on that device. So if it finds one that doesn't have the DNS server set, it will go set it. Or I can have it just throw an alert to tell me that it's missing. So you can use this configuration management capability to enforce configuration policy on your devices based on what templates are applied to them. I can also use this to just be aware of things where I know there's a particular security patch involved with TCP small servers. So I'm going to put that into my configuration map. And now if it finds anything with that rule, it'll flip that alarm in OmniCenter. So I can go get that notification through my configuration manager. Now, the outbound messages from Configuration Manager are sent through Incident Management. So if I go to Administration and I go to Alerts and I go down to Incident Management, you'll see a rule that's there by default called the Configuration Change Alert. And if you edit that rule, you'll actually see exactly what that rule is doing. It's going to say, if it gets a configuration change, create a new incident and send a custom alert to the Network Ops Center. And you can edit that to change who that alert goes to. So I can have this sent to a different place. I can change the actual format of the alert if I want to, but the Configuration Manager alert is actually going to be the most comprehensive version of that because it's going to give you the summary of the changes in that message. But that's how I would change who that alert goes out to. So if I wanted this alert to actually open a ServiceNow ticket, I could do that as well. And that's just an additional integration point that I can create. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is those APIs. So we looked really briefly at the webhook API and how it can be used to send messages out of OmniCenter. But there's also a number of different APIs that can be used to pull information from OmniCenter or to push information to OmniCenter. So as an example of that, I'm going to look at, for example, the Acknowledgement API. So this is designed to allow you to get two-way communication with systems. So for example, if I've got a ticketing system that I want to have automatically acknowledge the problem in OmniCenter when it gets somebody takes advantage of it, somebody takes ownership of that ticket. I can do that through the acknowledgement API. So the acknowledgement API allows me to go in and essentially make a call to OmniCenter that will force the incident to be acknowledged. And I can include, the username, the comment, any information I want to include in that message can be included in that message. So here's some examples of that. And so if I go to my OmniCenter and I go to Administration, Systems, and API Access, I need to make sure that my API access is turned on. You generally want to make sure you're using authentication and set a password as well for security purposes. But once that API is configured and turned on, then I can go in and use a tool like, for example, Postman. So Postman is an API testing tool. And this allows me to go out and do things like retrieve the list of incidents from OmniCenter. So the incident ID in OmniCenter can be viewed a number of different ways. I can fetch it using this API. I can include it in the messages that get sent out with the alerts. So OmniCenter can automatically populate that data. But the important part is once I got that actual incident ID in my tool, I can use that to populate a message to the incident acknowledgement API. So if you look, the acknowledgement API just requires you to provide the incident ID, a username, and then optionally a comment. And I can use that to actually acknowledge a problem in OmniCenter. So as an example, if I go in here and I pick this particular service alert, this is a current open incident on OmniCenter. I'm going to copy that incident ID. Now I'm going to create a brand new API call here. So I'm going to create a new request and call this acknowledge test. I'm going to create that, and I can either use get or post. If you're using HTTPS and you want to be secure, you should always use post. And put the parameters in the body of the message so that they'll be fully encrypted. So set that to form data. And then the keys that I need, password is the first one. So I need to make sure that my API password is populated. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to also say, I need an incident ID. Incident ID. I'm going to put in my incident ID, and then I'm going to give it my ACK user. And I'm going to give it an ACK comment. So once I kind of create that request to be sent to OmniCenter, I just need to tell it where to go. In this case, HBS, OmniCenter, Netreo.com, utils, and then it is the incident ACK API. Right, so I make sure all that's set correctly, and then I go ahead and I can test this by hitting send. And it's going to tell me what it gets back from the system. So if there's a problem, it doesn't work, the message is wrong, my URL is wrong, which in this case I just realized it is because it's supposed to be net. Let's try that again, send. It should respond and tell me what it gets back. And in this case, the API is going to respond with a 1 if the acknowledgement was successful or a 0 if it failed. So it makes it very simple to integrate with your existing systems. If I go to my OmniCenter now and I look at my active incidents, I'm going to see that that incident is now acknowledged via the API, and that's actually the message that got sent to it. So the acknowledgement API is a really simple example of this. There are some other APIs that are well documented on the wiki site here, including being able to go in and create maintenance windows, add devices, delete devices, all of that kind of functionality is available through those APIs. And it's all very, very simple web calls to make that really easy to use and kind of simple to integrate into your system. So with that, thank you for joining us. And I know there's a lot to absorb here, and we kind of sped through a lot of it. So if you have any questions or if you need any help integrating OmniCenter into your ITSM practice, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at info@netreo.com, or you can also contact support. Thank you for your time. Have a happy holiday season, and we hope to see you at another webinar soon.